The urge to walk over there with a pot of coffee and a checklist was almost overwhelming, but she stayed in her seat. A survivor knows when to fight, but a mother knows when to retreat. Chapter 30. The Maple Street Blues. At the house on Maple, the architecture of belonging was currently consisting of several half-unpacked boxes and a plumbing system that seemed to be playing a percussion solo. Van was under the kitchen sink, his Norris Realty tie long gone, replaced by a tattered t-shirt and a layer of grime. "Shay, hand me the wrench. The big one. No, the one that looks like it belongs to a giant." Cheyenne walked in, Thomas balanced on one hip and Elizabeth clutching her leg. "Van, maybe we should call a plumber, or my mom, especially my mom." "No." Van's voice emerged muffled from the cabinet. "I am the man of this house. Steve Norris didn't give me a bidet so I could call another man to fix a U-joint. I've got this." A sudden spray of water and a loud awe suggested he did not, in fact, have it. Van emerged, dripping wet, looking like a drowned golden retriever. "I miss the garage," he admitted softly. Cheyenne sat on a packing crate and pulled him down next to her. "We all do, honey. But look at this place. It's messy, it's broken, and it smells like wet cedar, but it's ours. We're not the guests anymore. We're the hosts." Van leaned his wet head on her shoulder. "I'm going to need a lot of wrenches, Che." "I'll get the toolbox," she promised. "But first, I'm calling Luigi. We need a pizza, and we need it delivered to the Montgomery residence." Chapter 31. The Birdhouse Boutique. Across the street, Brock's birdhouse empire had officially hit a snag, specifically a snobbish, well-manicured snag named Victoria Sterling. Victoria was the president of the Houston Horticultural Society, and she had heard rumors of the suburban avian luxury being produced in a garage in a cul-de-sac. She arrived in a car that cost more than Reba's house and looked at Brock's workshop through a pair of designer glasses. "Mr. Hart," she said, her voice like chilled silk. "These structures, they are charming, but they lack a certain je ne sais quoi. They are a bit too homegrown for the gala auction." Brock, who was currently wearing a tool belt and a smudge of cedar dust on his nose, bristled. "Homegrown? Ma'am, this is a replica of the San Antonio missions. The shingles are hand-cut. The drainage is state-of-the-art." Barbara Jean stepped in, her eyes gleaming with the fire of a marketing genius. "What Victoria means, Brock, is that we haven't told the story yet. They are avian heritage sanctuaries. They are for the discerning cardinal who values history over humidity." Victoria paused. "Heritage sanctuaries? That has a certain ring to it." "Exactly," Barbara Jean continued, leading the woman toward the mansions for Martin's display. "And 10% of the proceeds go to the Heart and Soul Community Revitalization Fund, which is currently helping a local family renovate a historical property on Maple Street." Reba, watching from her porch, couldn't help but admire the sheer audacity of it. Barbara Jean was using Van and Cheyenne's fixer-upper as a charitable cause to sell birdhouses to socialites. "She's a locust," Reba muttered. "But she's a locust with a very good publicist." Chapter 32. The Empty Nest Syndrome. By the third week, the novelty of the quiet house had worn off, and a restless energy had taken its place. Reba found herself cleaning the baseboards for the third time and alphabetizing her spice rack by country of origin. Kira was in her room, the door closed, the muffled sound of a college survival podcast drifting through the hallway. She was leaving in 4 days for Texas Women's University. Reba knocked on the door. "Kira? I made those mini quiches you like. The ones that taste like fancy cardboard." Kira opened the door. She looked smaller than usual, surrounded by trunks and piles of textbooks. "Mom, do you think I'll be okay? I mean, I spent a year living with Dad and Barbara Jean. My bar for normal is pretty low." Reba sat on the edge of the bed. "You'll be more than okay. You're a heart. We thrive in chaos, and we survive in the quiet. But mostly, we just keep going." "Are you going to be okay?" Kira asked, her eyes searching Reba's face. "Without the noise?" without Van asking you how to boil an egg? I'll have my work, Reba said, though heart and soul was currently just her and a very distracted Van. And I'll have the pleasure of knowing that if I leave a dish in the sink, it's my dish. But as she looked at her daughter, the difficult child who had finally found her way home only to leave again, Reba felt the familiar sting of the survivor's burden. You fight to give them wings, and then you have to stand on the ground and watch them fly. Chapter 33. The Graduation of the Soul. The day Kira left was a sweltering Houston afternoon that made the air feel like a warm, wet hug. The entire clan gathered in Reba's driveway. Brock in a proud TW Dad t-shirt, Barbara Jean with a cooler full of nutritional road trip snacks, and Van and Cheyenne with a very sleepy Thomas. Now, remember, Brock said, checking the oil in Kira's car for the 4th time. If you hear a ticking sound, it's the valves. If you hear a screaming sound, it's probably your roommates. Thanks, Dad, Kira said, hugging him. She turned to Reba. There were no words, just a long, tight embrace that held the history of their battles and their eventual peace. Call me, Reba whispered, even if it's just to complain about the quiche. Every day, Kira promised. As the car pulled out of the cul-de-sac, the group stood in the middle of the street. For a moment, they weren't ex-husbands and wives, or rivals, or business partners. They were just people whose lives were inextricably knotted together. Well, Brock said, looking at the empty spot where Kira's car had been. I guess that's it. The kids are all grown up. Not all of them, Cheyenne said, looking at Thomas. And not the business, Van added. Mrs. H, I was thinking, we need a new listing. Something big. Something that Steve Norris would hate. Reba looked at the house on Maple, then back at her own empty garage. The survivor in her was already stirring, looking for the next hill to climb. I have an idea, Reba said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. There's an old warehouse near the ship channel. It's ugly, it's haunted, and the city wants to condemn it. It's perfect. A warehouse? Barbara Jean asked. What could we do with a warehouse? We could turn it into the Heart and Soul Collaborative, Reba said. Office space for us, a workshop for Brock's birdhouses, and a boutique for whatever it is Barbara Jean is selling this week. Van's eyes lit up. A headquarters. A real one. It's a gamble, Reba warned. It could take every penny we have. I'm in, Van said instantly. I'm in, Brock added. I'll handle the grand opening, Barbara Jean squealed. Reba looked at her family. They were messy, they were ridiculous, and they were hers. The house was empty, but the heart was expanding. Chapter 34. The Ship Channel Sentinel. The warehouse was a cavernous structure of red brick and rusted iron, smelling of salt air and forgotten industry. It sat on the edge of the water, watching the massive tankers slide by like silent ghosts. It's rustic, Van said, his voice echoing in the vast space. It's a dump, Reba corrected cheerfully, but it's our dump. As they began to plan the layout, marking the floor with masking tape, Reba felt a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't just managing a family anymore, she was building a legacy. She walked to the large loading dock door and looked out over the Houston ship channel. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of orange and bruised purple. A car pulled up, a sleek, familiar black sedan. Steve Norris stepped out. He looked tired. The investigations had taken their toll. The crispness of his suit was gone, and there were deep lines around his mouth. I heard you bought this place, Steve said, walking up to the dock. We did, Reba replied. It's a bad investment, Reba. The ground is contaminated. The structure is questionable. You'll be bankrupt in 6 months. Maybe, Reba shrugged, but I'll be bankrupt with people I like. Can you say the same, Steve? Steve looked at the empty, echoing space behind her. He looked at Van and Brock, who were currently arguing over where to put the coffee machine. For a moment, the titan of Houston real estate looked very, very small. Anne likes her new house, he said softly. She says it has soul. It does, Reba said. You should try getting some. It's much more rewarding than a bidet. Steve didn't argue. He just nodded, turned, and drove away into the gathering dark. Chapter 35. The First Light. The grand opening of the Heart and Soul Collaborative was a triumph of glitter over common sense. Barbara Jean had draped the warehouse in industrial chic lights, and the air was filled with the scent of cedar and expensive catering. Victoria Sterling was there, as was Mrs. Gable, and 100 other people who had once thought of the Hearts as that weird family in the cul-de-sac. Brock's heritage sanctuaries were sold out within the first hour. Van was closing a deal on a mid-century modern in River Oaks, and Cheyenne was managing the crowd with a grace that made Reba's chest swell with pride. Late in the evening, as the crowd began to thin, Reba stood on the loading dock, breathing in the cool night air. "We did it, Mrs. H," Van said, coming up beside her. He looked exhausted, but happy. "We really did it." "We did," Reba said. She looked at her phone. A text from Kira. "Dorm is weird, but I'm surviving. Miss you, Mom." Reba smiled. She looked back into the warehouse, where her family was laughing, working, and living. The architecture of belonging wasn't about walls or roofs or mahogany banisters. It was about the people you chose to stand with when the storm came. She was a single mom who had worked too hard. She was a business owner. She was a grandmother. She was Reba Hart. And as the lights of Houston twinkled in the distance, she knew that the best chapters were still waiting to be written. Heart and Soul. The Architecture of Belonging. Prologue. The Humidity of Change.